Welcome to the Multigen Mini Masterclass. Real stories, honest insights, and expert tips on multi-generational living. Whether you're thinking about it, already living it, or just curious, you're in the right place because we're your go-to resource. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to today's Multigen Mini Masterclass. I'm so excited for this episode. It's going to be a special one as we talk about what it's like to live in a truly multi-generational household. Megan has not only four kids and her husband, but she's got her grandparents here. And I think that's one of the first conversations I've had with the grandparents of the parents being there, which is super cool, creating a dynamic that's I'm sure unlike anything else. So I met Megan recently through a collaborator friend that we both share. And I'm excited to get to know you more, Megan, as we talk about this. You know, Megan is an intuitive business consultant. She's a mother of four and someone who understands firsthand the magic and the real life logistics of multi-generational living. So I so glad you're here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk about this. We don't know a whole lot of people that are personally that are having the same experience as us. So it's fun to be able to talk about it.
Yay. Well, let's dive in if you're ready to go too.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Okay. So your grandparents started visiting more often once your twins were born. Is that right?
Yep, that's correct. Now, we always visited a couple times a year, right? Like whether they came here to Arizona or we went to Colorado, and they would be lengthy stays, like a good 10 to 14 days or so, for a trip, And so it started like that, and then they started staying longer once the twins were born. Yeah.
And was it like an organic, natural, like we're just gonna stay longer, or were you the one who was like, you guys should stay, or were they like, we would really like to stay? Talk about how that transition was brought out into that. How did that conversation first start that we're gonna extend this maybe?
Yeah, well, it was pretty organic. It wasn't planned. It wasn't like thought about. Even like when I was pregnant with the twins, we had no intention on that. But once my grandparents retired, they had their own cabin at a ranch, and that's where they would stay for the summer. They love it's off grid, but during the winters, they would stay with my uncle or their son for long amounts of time. So then they could come to us and spend weeks. And when the babies were there, the couple of weeks turned into, a month or a month and a half. And then they would go back, and a couple more months later, they'd come back for another month and a month and a half. And I said, maybe you could take turns staying longer with us and, sharing some of that time that you're doing at Uncle Jeff's. And their first reaction was, well, we would have never wanted someone living with us at such a young family.
Right.
We wouldn't have wanted people in our space. We have five kids total. Molly is an adult now, but she comes back and forth. And at that time they're like, you have five kids. You were both working at the time. My husband's now retired, and their thinking was we would have never wanted that. So we've actually been leaving in order to give you your
Yep.
spaciousness and that sort of thing. So then we started to saying, what would it look like? What if you came for 3 months at a time? And now we're at about 6 months out of the year that they are with us, probably it's usually about a 4 to 5 month stint, and then a couple months in between so we can travel and that sort of thing. So it was very organic. It wasn't pre-planned. It was more like we're enjoying our time together when you're here for 3 weeks. We miss you when we're gone. And it did not feel like any sort of taking away our freedom or ability to just move the way that we normally would with our family.
Sure. Well, and how wonderful that they were thinking of that aspect before maybe even you were, that they were trying to make sure that they weren't underfoot or crowding because you're a young family. And that's, I think, says a lot of when you're going into these types of situations to have folks that are a little self-aware and a little bit, because you hear horror stories the other way that, some grandparents, they just it doesn't ever click that
Yeah.
people might want privacy. So that's really good. How did your husband, was it pretty, both of you kind of had this evolving realization together?
Yeah, we talked quite a bit about it, and I would be checking in with him often, when they were staying, because now it's normal for me because
Right.
I've always been really close, and so them staying for weeks at a time as I was growing up was fairly normal. But then I would go, oh yeah, this is not
Right.
his normal. And a few years ago at this point, because I'm an entrepreneur and I lead a business. When the babies were born, we really started considering him staying home and retiring after 25 years in law enforcement. And so once he finally did that, and could feel the full pressure of being the mm, householder, right? The one taking care of the kids and the home. I think he found it very relieving to have my grandparents around to fill in those gaps. So for him, it was additional support. For me, it was like additional love.
Sure, absolutely. And this is something that I'm paying attention to. I'm an only child, and my parents, who we live with, are going into this property with. It's very natural for me. We are very close. We are a tight trio. And, over the years, my husband and I have been married over 20 years now, but I still like to check in with him because even though, my dad is his best friend and I want to make sure that it's always a we decision, not
Mhm.
just, oh, this feels normal to me and you're feeling like you're along for the ride, which I think is so important that everybody feels aligned.
Yeah, absolutely. I so agree with that. And it does take some conscious communication. I think you said it really good earlier. It matters to have self-aware people, right? No one feeling entitled to things being their way because that's how they've done it or I've done it. And so the ability to have conscious communication and our own self-awareness in our relationship, but also my relationship with my grandmother or my grandfather and that sort of thing. That really matters. That really matters. Like if communication is not what I would consider conscious or easy and allowed, I think that it would be a much more challenging experience versus like a blessing experience.
Sure, I couldn't agree more. And I'm such a, it's no surprise with me being in messaging, communication is the key of everything. So I love when I hear people say that they prioritize that and that they see the very deep need for it, especially when you start. I mean, it's important between in a marriage or with children, but when you start getting, you've got 8 or 9 people in your
Mhm.
setup. And that's so important that everyone be able to communicate. Do you find that the communication styles are pretty similar between the adults? Or have you had to have some figuring out how people talk with each other?
Yeah, I would say it's probably not similar. I would say that me and Scott have our conscious communication, that we have practiced throughout our marriage in a very intentional, purposeful way, right? Like we have worked with coaches for like the same pair for about 5 years now. It's a very intentional process, and so, whether it be my parents or my grandparents they're not doing that same amount of personal or spiritual evolution in a relationship way. However, because we do have those tools, any communication with any extended family is much, much easier. So, my grandparents don't communicate in the same way that Scott and I would, but our communication with them is pretty open and fluid and everything belongs sort of vibe.
I love that. I love that. What would you say has been maybe one of the best parts of having your grandparents live with you? Like, what's some of your favorite things
Yeah.
about it?
Ooh, there's so many. One, it just my kids are constantly getting love and support and poured into. Either me or Scott doesn't carry the full burden or responsibility or privilege of primary parent. We really get to have that support. And with 5 kids, it seems like not all 5 are always happy, satiated, fulfilled at the same time. Right? So while maybe we're supporting one through a difficult school experience or Molly considering college, there's, the grandparents that can also sit and play with the toddlers. So that feels really nourishing, really luxurious to know that the kids have additional support. Of course, they almost always prefer mom or dad, and it is just extra padding, extra filling. So that's my favorite. We also love doing what we call linners. So instead of brunch, it's dinner dinner, an early
Yep.
dinner. And that's kind of just a fun celebration that we do every Sunday. And then also shared responsibility. I lead a business, and I've never been one to be hardcore about dinner. I do a homemade family breakfast each day, but then at the end of the day, typically my grandparents are taking care of dinner. So
Oh, how
while
great.
we're getting while we're getting girls ready for bath and bed, dinner is being cleaned up and kitchen is being situated, and it's just a really great back and forth.
That's awesome. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about those responsibilities and how you guys decided who did what. I'm sure part of it is just logistics. Like you said, you've got hours that you're working, your kids have school hours, and it's I'm sure partly who's available when. But when you decide who's going to do cooking, meal planning, cleaning, or taking the kids to their, zillion activities, talk to me about how you guys have split those responsibilities and do they change? Do they feel good? How does that go?
They typically change based on what is needed and what's necessary. So Scott and I are typically the ones to do most for the kids. Um, and they're kind of filling in, right? So, for example, in right now my husband's out of town. Tonight the kids have music. I would actually ask my grandpa to take them to music, the older two, because the younger two are still home. On a regular week, I would take them to music. Because Scott would be home with the younger kids. And we have had some formal discussions around dinner. My grandma's happy to make dinner, but she wants us to make the menu, right? Like
Oh,
you go to the
nice.
grocery store, you make the menu, and I'll prep the dinner, and then grandpa cleans. So some of those have been very just sort of laid out. And grandma tends to do the kids' laundry, those sorts of things, because the house is empty during the day, all the kids are gone. So I work, we do financially support the household. That is probably not, I don't know if that is common for everyone, but that is one of our privileges is we financially support the household, and they support in like they pick up and help us keep it tidy so that we can be fully focused on the kids.
Very awesome. Okay, so it sounds like everyone pretty much has clear roles and it that they seem to naturally gravitate toward what folks enjoy the most. If your grandmother loves cooking but doesn't want to have to handle like the endless decision making, what are we having? What are we I'm a menu planner and I do it every weekend so that I don't have to think about it again during the week. Because I
Right.
dread that conversation every day. What are we having for dinner? Did I thaw
Yeah.
something? Do I have to pick something up? So how great that you get to do the part that you enjoy, which is the planning, making sure the ingredients are there. And then
Yep.
she gets to handle the cooking because that's, probably one of her ways of showing love and support anyway.
Yeah, and if you think about something as well, we think that dinner is simple, but there's a lot that goes into it. There's the menu planning, there's the preparation, there's the getting the food. And so I tend to plan the menu. My husband does the grocery shopping, and then my grandma cooks and my grandpa cleans up afterwards. And so these things that feel so overwhelming for one person, especially at the end of the day, having worked, to have it dispersed and everyone has about an inch of of it, it makes it so much easier and doable. And now it's not daunting.
Absolutely. Talk to me about the setup of your home. Do your grandparents have just a bedroom and a bathroom? Do they have a section of the house? Are they in an ADU separate building? How does that work in your home? Because you've got a lot of moving parts with eight, sometimes nine people.
Yes, totally. Our house, I don't know, it definitely is not set up for generational living. I don't think.
Okay.
I could be very wrong about that because we have about 3,000 square feet. So there is spaciousness and 5 bedrooms. And so all of our kids bunk. So the two older kids and then the two twins, they both share a room. And Molly, again, is fluid. She doesn't live here anymore. Then Scott and I have our room, and Grandma and Grandpa, they have their own room and their own bathroom. And then there's still an office that I'm in here and multiple living spaces, right? So two different living spaces.
Nice.
So the way that we do it is that they get their own room and they get their own bathroom. Now, we also have two 3-year-olds, so no one really has their own bathroom. Right? That's something that we have not been yet able to provide in this particular home where there's like removed quarters, like a mother-in-law suite or a
Right.
casita or something like that. Definitely on the heart and mind, but given what we have here, that isn't how it works. But there is plenty of spaciousness, and that has mattered because Grandma wakes up really early to do her own self-care, and so do I. And so having, living area downstairs and upstairs, very, very helpful. But that's how we do it right now, is they do have their own bathroom. Kids have their own bathroom. Me and my husband have our own bathroom. And the girls take over. The twins take over. They go to everyone's room.
Well, and I hear, the importance of having your own bathroom and multi-gen setups. It seems to be something that everyone across the board seems to
Yes.
note as important. So I think that that's a great food for thought for folks considering this, that even if you don't have the mother-in-law suite or the room over the garage or something, as long as everyone has their own bathroom, because there's nothing worse than having to wait on someone else when I think that's
Yeah.
a
And it's
lovely.
just such an intimate space, right? It's like I don't want to have to, with the shared space downstairs, kitchen, living, dining, that sort of thing. We all get to be really respectful of each other. Whereas in my own room, in my own bathroom, I can be messy,
Yeah.
right? I can be messy and keep my hair stuff out. My curling iron's still hot when I unplug it. And when you're sharing with other adults outside of, for me, my husband, uh, that's that for me would feel like walking on eggshells, right? Like, oh man, I'm not keeping it tidy enough for the next person. Whereas own bedroom, own bathroom, keeps that sovereignty, that freedom.
So important. And you bring up a good point. You mentioned, you and your grandmother both get up early in the morning and you like to have, you don't want to have to come and talk and you do your own self-care. And you had mentioned that it was really important to you that your grandparents always feel that they are every bit as much at home in your home as you are, and making
Yeah.
sure that there's not that, guest mentality. And I think a lot of us worry about that anytime folks come into our home. We
Yeah.
have, I know I have the tendency to make sure they're cared for, make sure they're, so
Mhm.
transitioning into making sure they feel at home, they can get food when they're hungry, they can get drinks when they're thirsty. I think that's such a good point that you make, that multi-generational living is not about typically one family being guests of the other.
Right. And that actually does take practice. For us, it was quite a few conversations. Like, it's really important for me to eventually feel so comfortable. And we actually had this conversation that it, when I go off to bed, I actually don't want to feel as though I am obligated to walk around and say goodnight to everyone. Right?
Yes.
Okay, good night. I'm going to bed. Okay, good night. I'm going to bed. And some people would go, well, that's just courteous. That's courteous. And when we're generationally living, we would not do that if we had our own homes. Right? I wouldn't call mom and dad and grandma and grandpa. And so sometimes I just want to live the way that I would live totally on my own and them as well, right? So there's not a lot of asking permission and things like that. It is we come together on dinners every once in a while for special occasions. We go out to dinner. Otherwise, everyone is roaming and coming and going as they please.
I think that's wonderful. And I'm so aligned with that. In our setup, we have two homes on the same property and they share a wall. But
Mhm.
they're not connected inside. And I think that was really important when we were determining what setup was going to be best for us for those kinds of reasons, because I don't want to have to feel like I need to go around and say goodnight, or that when I get up in the morning, I need to think, oh, I wonder if somebody's up yet, because I just feel like sitting and vegging out at my kitchen counter.
Mhm.
And I think that you're right. If you wouldn't do it in two separate homes, I think it's really important when you live together in this kind of setup that you don't feel that obligation either.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a really great differentiator. If you wouldn't do it in separate homes, don't put the pressure on yourself of having to do it this way.
Absolutely. What do you think would be the some of the biggest benefits that your kids are getting? What do you think your kids are gaining most from growing up in a multi-gen household?
Hmm. Well, definitely the just the additional hands-on support, but also a wider world view, right? Like we just see things differently than my grandparents see them, given what their upbringing was and what the world looked like then, to what it is now. They're really getting a vast experience with it. Having an additional mother figure, father figure, I think those things really matter. But I also notice a lot of what my grandparents get. Like I notice my grandfather is actually younger when he's here. He seems younger and more vital, like more life force energy when there are moments that we leave town and now he's on the clock, and it's up to him to get kids to and from
Yep.
school and to their extracurriculars. I mean, he wakes up and he gets dressed up like as if he was going back to work or something, right? He's tucking in his shirt, he's got things to do, and it's taking care of the kids. And there's this interesting symbiotic flow that happens. It's like he has a new purpose or drive in that moment. And the kids also get to learn, oh, the only person, I don't need only one person, right? It isn't only my mom that can meet my needs. It isn't only my dad that can meet my needs. So I really see it as just a flow.
I love that. And you mentioned too, like from a fun aspect, you mentioned some really fun moments, like your twins scaring grandpa every morning, or like the
Right.
bribing grandpa for slushies on the way home from school.
Totally.
I think those types of things, are there any that really stand out in your mind as like, this was really cool that my kid got to have this experience with grandma or grandpa?
Yeah, well, it was just recently my grandma's birthday, and we went to the farmer's market, and both the kids were just so excited to choose a gift for her. Then they came home and made, homemade gift baskets and put their little gift in there and wrote messages and helped her make her birthday cake. I know, helped her make her birthday cake, but they like to cook together. And, there was just a lot of happy tears that day. She just felt so loved and just thought it was precious how excited they were to treat her for her birthday, and they felt purposeful in that. And the endless moments like that, endless moments. The girls have their play kitchen, one outside and one inside, so they're always, waiting tables. They're being our waitresses and taking orders of grandma, and so they've memorized what grandpa almost always orders, what grandma likes, and it's really precious to see.
What cool memories and
Yeah.
experiences they're having that are truly unique because you've chosen to live, in this way. I think it's so amazing, and I'm so excited that more and more Americans are considering this and going in
Mhm.
going into this, around the world, multi-generational living has been, practiced for eons. And
Yes, very
the
common.
US is so it's like we're finally kind of waking up to the benefits, and whether it's for political reasons or the financial benefits or I think we're redefining what connection and presence looks
Mhm.
like. But there's all these different reasons, and it's just really cool that more and more kids are getting experiences like what you just described, and I'm excited to watch that continue. Let me ask you one
Absolutely.
last question and we will wrap up. For anyone who's considering their own multi-generational journey, what would be one thing, one something that you wish you knew from the start or that you would want to make sure that they knew?
Mm, the family dynamics and generational patterns matter. And so I actually wouldn't recommend it for everyone. I would recommend it for those that have taken a very intentional and conscious journey to learn healthy patterns and relating. And otherwise, you will probably be perpetuating something that might not be what it is that you're hoping for your kids. And so I think a good, healthy self-inquiry around the people that you're going to live with and yourself in relationship with them really matters. Really matters.
Such solid advice. And I couldn't agree more because you're right. It's not for everyone. And it's not
Yeah.
something to be taken lightly, especially when you've got all these different lives and livelihoods on the line.
Yeah,
I think that's
for
a
sure.
wonderful piece of advice. Thank you so much for this
Thank
beautiful
you.
conversation. And I love hearing how your family makes this work and is
Thank you.
evolving and growing as you figure it out, just like everyone else. Your wisdom is so appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Really great conversation.